Just to switch things up a little bit from Bergdorf Blondes. This one, if you're like a huge Bergdorf Blondes, the book fan, then I think you'll like totally get it. It's like inside, like meta, like totally inside. But my slight obsession with this other book, kind of like the Fringe Masoni dresses. But anyway, Chasing Harry Winston by Lauren Weisberger, author of The Devil Wears Prada. A dedication page for Mike or Mika with love. The chapters aren't numbered, but first chapter, they are titled First Chapter, Panties is a vile word. When Lee's doorbell rang unexpectedly at 9 on a Monday night, she did not think, gee, I wonder who that could be. She thought, shit, go away. Were there people who actually welcomed unannounced visitors when they just stopped by to say hello or check in? Recluses, probably. Or those friendly Midwestern folks she'd seen depicted in Big Love but had never actually met. Yes, they probably didn't mind. But this was an affront. Monday nights were sacred and completely off limits to the rest of the world. A time of no human contact, when Lee could veg out in sweats and watch episode after beautiful TiVo'd episode of Project Runway. It was her only time alone all week, and after some intensive training on her part, her friends, her family, and her boyfriend Russell finally abided by it. The girls had stopped asking for Monday night plans at the end of the 90s. Russell, who in the beginning of their relationship had openly balked, now quietly contained his resentment. Fun season and football season relished having his own Monday nights free. Her mother struggled through one night a week without picking up the phone to call, finally accepting after all these years that she wouldn't hear from Lee until Tuesday morning, no matter how many times she hit redial. Even Lee's publisher knew better than to assign her Monday night reading, or, God forbid, knew not to log an interrupting phone call, which is precisely why it was so incredible that her doorbell had just rung. Incredible and panic-inducing. Figuring it was her super there to change the air conditioning filter, or one of the delivery guys from Hot Enchiladas leaving a menu, or most likely of all, someone just confusing her door with one of her neighbors, she hit mute on the TV remote and did not move a muscle. She cocked her head to the side like a Labrador, straining for any confirmation that the intruder had left, but the only thing she heard was the dull, constant thudding from above. Suffering from what her old shrink called noise sensitivity and everyone else described as fucking neurotic, Lee had, of course, thoroughly scoped out her upstairs neighbor before signing over her life savings. The apartment might have been the most perfect she'd seen in a year and a half of looking, but she hadn't wanted to take any chances. Lee had asked Adriana for the scoop on the woman above her in apartment 17D, but her friend had just pursed her pouty lips and shrugged. No matter that Adriana had lived in the building's full-floor penthouse apartment from the day her parents had moved from Sao Paulo to New York nearly 2 decades before. She had completely embraced the New Yorkers I promise not to acknowledge you if you extend me the same courtesy attitude toward her neighbors, and could offer Lee no info on her neighbor. And so, on a blustery December Saturday right before Christmas, Lee had slipped the building's doorman $20, Bond style, and waited in the lobby pretending to read a manuscript. After Lee spent 3 hours scanning the same anecdote, the doorman coughed loudly and looked at her over the top of his glasses with meaning. Glancing up, Lee felt an immediate wave of relief. Before her, removing a QVC catalog from an unlocked mailbox, stood an overweight woman in a polka-dot house dress. Not a day younger than 80, thought Lee, and she breathed a sigh of relief. There would be no stilettos clacking against the hardwood floors, no late-night parties, no parade of visitors stomping around. The very next day, Lee wrote a check for the down payment, and 2 months later, she excitedly moved into her mint condition, one-bedroom dream apartment. It had a renovated kitchen, an oversized bathtub, and a more than decent northern view of the Empire State Building. It might have been one of the smallest units in the building. Okay, the smallest. But it was still a dream, a beautiful, lucky dream in a building Lee never thought she could afford. Each and every obscenely priced square foot paid for with her own hard work and savings. How could she possibly have predicted that the seemingly innocuous upstairs neighbor was a dedicated wearer of massive wooden orthopedic clogs? Still, Lee berated herself regularly for thinking high heels were the only potential noise risk. It had been an amateur's mistake. Before she'd spotted her neighbor wearing the offending shoes, Lee had created an elaborate explanation for the relentless upstairs racket. She decided that the woman had to be Dutch, since everyone knew Dutch people wore clogs, and the matriarch of a huge, proudly Dutch family who received constant visits from countless children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, siblings, cousins, and general advice seekers, all, most likely, Dutch clog wearers. After spotting her neighbor wearing an air cast and feigning interest in the woman's disgusting-sounding foot ailments, including, but not limited to, plantar fasciitis, ingrown toenails, neuromas, and bunions, Lee had clucked as sympathetically as she could manage and then raced upstairs to check her copy of the co-op rules. Sure enough, they dictated that owners were required to cover 80% of their hardwood floors with carpet, which she realized was an entirely moot point when the very next page revealed that her upstairs neighbor was president of the board. Lee had already endured nearly 4 months of round-the-clock clogging, something that might have been funny if it was happening to someone else. Her nerves were directly tied to the volume and frequency of the steady thump, thump, thump that segued into a thumpity-thump, thumpity-thump-thump pattern when Lee's heart began to pound right along with it. She tried to breathe slowly, but her exhales were short and raspy, punctuated by little guppy gasps. As she examined her pale complexion, which on good days she thought of as ethereal and at all other times accepted as sickly, in the mirrored hallway closet door, a thin sheen of perspiration dampened her forehead. It seemed to be happening more frequently, this sweating/breathing issue, and not just when she heard the wood-on-wood banging. Sometimes Lee would awaken from a sleep so deep it almost hurt, only to find her heart racing and her sheets drenched. Last week, in the middle of an otherwise completely relaxing shavasana, albeit one where the instructor felt compelled to play an a cappella version of Amazing Grace over the speakers, a sharp pain shot through Lee's chest on each measured inhale. And just this morning, as she watched the human tidal wave of commuters cram onto the N train, she forced herself to take the subway but hated every second of it. Lee's throat constricted and her pulse inexplicably quickened. There seemed to be only 2 plausible explanations, and although she could be a bit of a hypochondriac, even Lee didn't think she was a likely candidate for a coronary. It was a panic attack, plain and simple. In an ineffective attempt to dispel the panic, Lee pressed her fingertips into her temples and stretched her neck from side to side, neither of which did a damn thing. It felt like her lungs could reach only 10% capacity, and just as she considered who would find her body and when, she heard a choke sobbing and yet another ring of her doorbell. She tiptoed over to the door and looked through the peephole, but saw only empty hallway. This was exactly how people ended up robbed and raped in New York City, getting duped by some criminal mastermind into opening their doors. I'm not falling for this, she thought as she stealthily dialed her doorman. Never mind that her building's security rivaled the UN's, or that in 8 years of city living, she didn't personally know anyone who'd been so much as pickpocketed, or that the chances of a psychopathic murderer choosing her apartment from more than 200 other units in her building was unlikely. This was how it all started. The doorman answered after 4 eternally long rings. Gerard, it's Lee Eisner in 16D. There's someone outside my door. I think they're trying to break in. Can you come up here right away? Should I call 911? The words came out in a frantic jumble as Lee paced the small foyer and popped Nicorette squares into her mouth directly from the foil wrapper. Miss Eisner, of course I'll send someone up immediately, but perhaps you're mistaking Miss Solomon for someone else. She arrived a few minutes ago and proceeded directly to your apartment, which is permissible for someone on your permanent clearance list. Emmy's here? Lee asked. She forgot all about her imminent death by disease or homicide and pulled open her door to find Emmy rocking back and forth on the hallway floor, knees pulled tight against her chest, cheeks slick with tears. Miss, may I be of further assistance? Shall I still... Thanks for your help, Gerard. We're fine now, Lee said, snapping shut her cell phone and shoving it into the kangaroo pocket of her sweatshirt. She dropped to her knees without thinking and wrapped her arms around Emmy. Honey, what's wrong? She crooned, gathering Emmy's tear-dampened hair from her face into a ponytail. What happened? The show of concern brought with it a fresh stream of tears. Emmy was sobbing so hard her tiny body trembled. Lee ran through the possibilities of what could cause such pain and came up with only 3: a death in the family, a pending death in the family, or a man. Sweetie, is it your parents? Did something happen to them? To Izzy? Emmy shook her head. Talk to me, Emmy. Is everything okay with Duncan? This elicited a wail so plaintive it hurt Lee to hear it. Bingo. Over, Emmy cried, her voice catching in her throat. It's over for good. Emmy had made this pronouncement no fewer than 8 times in the 5 years she and Duncan had been dating, but something about tonight seemed different. Honey, I'm sure it's all just... He met someone. He what? Lee dropped her arms and sat back on her ankles. I'm sorry, let me rephrase. I bought him someone. What on earth are you talking about? Remember when I got him a membership at Clay for his 31st birthday because he was desperate to get back in shape? And then he never went, not one fucking time in 2 whole years because, according to him, it wasn't an efficient use of his time to just go and stand on the treadmill. So rather than just cancel the whole damn thing and forget about it, I, genius extraordinaire, decided to buy him a series of sessions with a personal trainer so he wouldn't have to waste one precious second exercising like everyone else. I think I can see where this is going. What? You think he fucked her? Emmy laughed mirthlessly. Sometimes surprised people to hear Emmy trash talk with such ferocity. She was, after all, only 5'1" and looked no older than a teenager, but Lee barely even noticed anymore. I thought so too. It's so much worse than that. That sounds bad enough, sweetheart. All-out loving sympathy and support were the best she could offer, but Emmy didn't appear comforted. You probably wonder how it could get worse, right? Well, let me tell you how. He didn't just fuck her. I could maybe deal with that. No, not my Duncan. He fell in love with her. Emmy jabbed out air quotes with the forefingers and middle fingers of both hands and rolled her bloodshot eyes. He's waiting for her, quote unquote, until she's ready. She's a virgin, for Christ's sake. I put up with 5 years of his cheating and lies and kinky weird sex so he can fall in love with a virgin trainer I hired in the gym I paid for. In love. Lee, what am I going to do? Lee, relieved that she could finally do something tangible, took Emmy's arm and helped her to her feet. Come in, honey. Let's go inside. I'll make us some tea and you can tell me what happened. Emmy sniffed. Oh, gosh, I forgot. It's Monday. I don't want to interrupt. I'll be fine. Don't be ridiculous. I wasn't even doing anything, Lee lied. Come in this minute. Lee led her to the couch and, after patting the overstuffed arm to indicate where Emmy should rest her head, ducked behind the wall that separated the living room from the kitchen. With its speckled granite countertops and new stainless steel appliances, the kitchen was Lee's favorite room in the whole apartment. All of her pots and pans hung from under cabinet hooks in order of size, and all of her utensils and spices were obsessively organized in matching glass and stainless containers. Crumbs, spills, wrappers, dirty dishes, all non-existent. The refrigerator looked like someone had hoovered it clean, and the countertops were entirely smudge-free. If it was possible for a room to personify its owner's neurotic personality, the kitchen and Lee could be identical twins. She filled the kettle, Panties purchased just last week during a Bloomingdale's home sale, because who said you were entitled to new things only when you registered? Panties. Piled a tray high with cheese and wheat thins, and peeked through the window into the living room to make sure Emmy was resting comfortably. Seeing that she was lying flat on her back with an arm flung over her eyes, Lee slipped out her cell phone and selected Adriana's name from her phone book. She typed SOS, END, finish, get down here ASAP. Do you have Advil? Emmy called from the couch, and then more quietly, Duncan always carried Advil. Lee opened her mouth to add that Duncan had always carried a lot of things: a business card for his favorite escort service, a wallet-sized picture of himself as a child, and occasionally a genital wart or two that he swore were just skin tags, but she controlled herself. In addition to being unnecessary, since Emmy was suffering enough, it would be hypocritical. Contrary to everyone's belief, Lee wasn't exactly in the world's most perfect relationship either. But she pushed the thought of Russell from her mind. Sure, I'll get you some in a minute, she said, turning off the whistling kettle. Tea's ready. The girls had just taken their first sips when the doorbell rang. Emmy looked at Lee, who'd just said Adriana. It's open, Lee called toward the front door. But Adriana had already figured that out. She stormed into the living room and stood with her hands on her hips, surveying the scene. What is going on here? She demanded. Adriana's slight Brazilian accent, little more than a soft, sexy lilting, when she was calm, made her almost unintelligible when she felt, in her own words, passionate about someone or something, which was pretty much always. Where are the drinks? Lee motioned to the kitchen. Water's still hot. Check the cupboard above the microwave. I have a whole bunch of different flavors in. No tea? Adriana screeched and pointed to Emmy. Can't you see she's miserable? We need real drinks. I'll make the Brazilian drinks that start with a C, CAIPIR, whatever you say it. Sorry. I don't have any mint or limes. Actually, I'm not even sure I have the right booze, Lee said. I brought everything. Adriana lifted a large paper bag over her head and grinned. Lee often found Adriana's abruptness irritating, sometimes a little overwhelming, but tonight she was grateful to her for taking control of the situation. It had been nearly 12 years since Lee first saw Adriana smile, and still left her feeling awestruck and a little anxious. How could someone possibly be that beautiful? She wondered for the 100,000th time. What higher power orchestrated such a perfect union of genes? Who decided that one single solitary soul deserves skin like that? It was so fundamentally unfair. It was another few minutes before the drinks were mixed and distributed and everyone had settled down. Emmy and Adriana sprawled on the couch. Lee sat cross-legged on the floor. So, tell us what happened, Lee said, placing a hand on Emmy's ankle. Just take your time and tell us all about it. Emmy sighed and, for the first time since she arrived, cried out. There's not that much to tell. She's absolutely adorable, like nauseatingly cute, and young, really, really young. What's really, really young? Lee asked. 23. That's not so young. She has a MySpace profile, Emmy said. Lee grimaced. And she's on Facebook. Good Lord, Adriana muttered. Yeah, I know. Her favorite color is lavender, and her favorite book is The South Beach Diet, and she just adores cookie dough, campfires, and watching Saturday morning cartoons. Oh, and she simply must get 9 hours of sleep, or else she's really, really cranky. What else? Lee asked, although she could predict the answer. What else do you want to know? Adriana started the quiz show like round. Name, Brianna Sheldon. College, SMU, comm major, Kappa Kappa Gamma. Emma enunciated these last 3 words with a perfect Valley Girl inflection. Hometown, born in Richmond, raised in the suburb of Charleston. Music, like you even have to ask, Kenny Chesney. High school sport, let's just all say it in unison, Emmy said. Cheerleading, Adriana and Lee simultaneously. I think there's a typo. It should say Adriana and Lee said simultaneously. Said Adriana. Anyway. Given, Emmy sighed, but then she smiled for a second. I found some pictures of her from her sister's wedding photographer's website. She even manages to look good in real taffeta. The whole thing is positively nauseating. The girls all laughed, each accustomed to this oldest of female bonding traditions. When your life was in the gutter because your ex-boyfriend suddenly surfaced on weddingchannel.com, nothing offered comfort like trashing the new girlfriend. It was actually how they had become friends in the first place. Leah and Emmy met each other first in Astronomy 101, a class both were taking to fulfill the dreaded science requirement. Neither realized until it was too late that astro was actually an aggressive mixture of chemistry, calculus, and physics, not the chance to learn all the constellations and look at the pretty stars like they had hoped. They were the 2 least competent and lowest scoring members of their lab group, and their TA had strung together enough English words to let them know that they'd better start improving or they would fail the class, which prompted Lee and Emmy to meet 3 times a week in the study lounge at Emmy's dorm, a glass-enclosed fluorescent lit pod wedged between the kitchen and the co-ed bathroom. The girls were just beginning to tackle the review notes for the upcoming midterm when they heard banging, followed by distinctly female shrieks. Emmy and Lee looked at each other and smiled as they listened to the angry words being exchanged down the hall. Sure, it was yet another argument between a scorned sorority girl and the drunken guy who hadn't called the next day. The yelling shifted, however, and within seconds, Emmy and Lee watched as a gorgeous honey blonde with a sexy accent took a verbal barrage from a hysterical, red-faced, significantly less pretty blonde directly outside the study lounge. I can't believe I voted for you, the red-faced girl screamed. I actually stood up in front of the whole chapter to speak on your behalf, and this is how you show your appreciation, by sleeping with my boyfriend? The stunner with the accent sighed. When she spoke, it was with quiet resignation. Annie, I've said I'm sorry. I never would have done that had I known he was your boyfriend. This was not calming to the screamer. How could you not have known? We've been together for months. I didn't know because he accosted me last night, flirted with me, bought me drinks, and asked me to his fraternity formal. I'm sorry if it didn't occur to me that he had a girlfriend. If it had, I assure you I wouldn't have been interested. The girl held out her hand in a gesture of reconciliation and apology. Please, men aren't that important. Let's forget about it, okay? Forget about it? The girl hissed, almost snarled through closed teeth. You're nothing more than a little freshman whore, sleeping with the seniors because you think they actually like you. Stay away from me and stay away from him, and keep your stupid freshman trampiness out of my life. Understood? The girl's voices had gotten louder. By the time she'd asked if Adriana understood, she was shouting again. Emmy and Lee watched as Adriana took a long look at the girl, appeared to weigh a response in her mind, and then, deciding against it, simply said, "Understood perfectly." Immediately, the angry blonde swiveled on one puma and flounced away. Adriana finally allowed herself to smile before noticing Emmy and Lee watching from the lounge. "Did you just see that?" Adriana asked, moving into the doorway. Emmy coughed and Lee blushed and nodded. "She was really pissed," Lee said. Adriana laughed. "As she so kindly pointed out, I'm just some stupid freshman. How am I supposed to know who's dating who around here? Especially when the guy in question spent half the night telling me how great it is to be single again after being tied down for the last 4 months. Was I supposed to hook him up to a polygraph?" Lee leaned back in her chair and took a swig from her Diet Coke. "Maybe you should start carrying a list of every single older girl on campus and their phone numbers. That way, every time you meet a guy, you can call every one of them to make sure he's available." Adriana's face broke into a huge smile, and Lee was charmed. She saw immediately why the boy from the previous night had lost all memory of his girlfriend in Adriana's presence. "I'm Adriana," she said, giving first Lee and then Emmy a little wave, "apparently also known as Class of 2000 Queen Slut." Lee introduced herself. "Hey, I'm Lee. I was thinking of rushing this next semester until I just met your sister, so thanks for that informative lesson." Emmy dog-eared her textbook page and smiled up at Adriana. "My name is Emmy. I also go by the last remaining virgin in the class of 2000, in case you haven't heard. It's a pleasure to meet you." The girls had talked that night for 3 hours, and when they were finished, they had established a game plan for the next few weeks. Adriana would drop out of the sorority she had joined under duress, pressure from her mother. Lee would withdraw her application to rush in the spring, and Emmy would lose her virginity the moment she met an appropriate candidate. In the 12 years since that night, the girls had barely come up for air. And I also happened to read on her Friendster page, using Duncan's password, of course, that she dreams of having 2 boys and a girl and wants to be a young mom. Isn't that just precious? It doesn't seem that part bothered Duncan. Lee and Adriana exchanged glances, then looked at Emmy, who was completely absorbed in removing a cuticle in an apparent effort not to cry. So, there it was, the new girl's age, her cheerleading. Even her oh-so-adorable name might have been infuriating, but they weren't intolerable. The fact that she too yearned to be a mom as soon as humanly possible was a real clincher. For as long as anyone could remember, Emmy had been very vocal about her desire to have children, obsessed. She told anyone who would listen that she wanted a huge family, and she wanted it as soon as possible. 4, 5, 6 kids, boys, girls, a bunch of each. It didn't matter to Emmy, as long as it happened, soon. And while Duncan certainly knew better than anyone how badly Emmy wanted to be a mom, he had managed to wriggle free of any major discussions about the topic. The first 2 years of their relationship, Emmy had kept this particular desire to herself. After all, they were only 25, and even she knew there was plenty of time. But as their years together started to cycle past at what felt like warp speed, and Emmy grew more insistent, Duncan only got cagier. He would say things like, "Statistically speaking, chances are I'll have kids one day." And Emmy would ignore the lack of enthusiasm in his telling pronoun choice, focusing instead on the fact that Duncan had uttered those 3 magical words, "I'll have kids." It was because of those magical words that Emmy conceded Duncan his overnight work absences and once, goodness knows why now, an inexplicable brush with some horrific STD. After all, he had agreed to be the father of her future children. Adriana broke the silence by doing what she always did when she got uncomfortable, changing the subject entirely. "Lee, querida, it's 75 degrees outside. Why are you dressed for the middle of winter?" Lee looked at her thick fleece pants and matching sweatshirt and shrugged. "Do you not feel well? Are you cold?" "I don't know. It was just what was lying around. What does it matter?" It's not that it matters, it's just strange that someone so, how should I say it, temperature aware isn't positively melting right now. Lee wasn't about to admit that she was actually warm, too warm, but that there were extenuating circumstances. Adriana might have asked, but she definitely didn't want to hear that Lee swathed herself in clothing because she hated when the backs of her arms or thighs stuck to the leather couch. That, of course, she'd prefer to sit around in a pair of boxers and a tank top, but the skin on leather stickiness, not to mention the annoying ripping noises every time she shifted position, made this impossible. Lee knew they would think her crazy if she explained that she'd actually already worn all of her lightweight full-length pajama pants and even all of her yoga pants, and that because she preferred to wear them without underwear, they were really only single-use pants and ended up in the wash pretty quickly. So she was really wearing the fleece sweatsuit only because it was the single clean option in her closet that was capable of protecting her from the dreaded leather couch, which both her mother and Emmy had insisted would be the right choice. Even though Lee had really wanted the modern fabric one that wouldn't have felt like sitting in a vat of rubber cement all the time. Not to even mention the fact that in a few short months, 6, it would be winter and she'd still have to dress like an Eskimo, because regardless of how toasty warm she kept the apartment, the couch would feel like ice against her bare skin instead of snuggly and soft like the micro-suede one everyone else had vetoed. No, it would be better to just leave well enough alone. Lee murmured, hoping to end the conversation by saying nothing. I think we're ready for another round. The second drink went down easier than the first, so easily in fact that even the increased upstairs thumping no longer made Lee feel quite so unhinged. It was time to rally for her friend. So, give us the top 3 things a cheerleader will be less than thrilled to discover about Duncan, Lee said, placing her soles together and pushing her knees to the floor, feeling the stretch in her inner thighs. I'm going to pause there and continue later because I'm exhausted and hungry and in a really uncomfortable position, and I have to make my bed because I just did laundry. So, to be continued.